Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the virtual coffee break with Sky Island Alliance. I'm Emily Burns, Program Director with Sky Island Alliance. This is our virtual gathering in the kitchen, if you will, for us to talk about the important issues that are going on in the Sky Island region. I'd like to thank all of our donors and our volunteers that are giving so much to enable us to continue to protect and restore the diversity of life and lands in the Sky Island region. If you've been missing past coffee breaks, you can visit skyislandalliance.org and go to our library to watch recordings of the past conversations we've had in this series. Our next coffee break coming up, you can register now, is going to be on how to set up a wildlife camera in your own backyard. And if any of you know me, I am completely obsessed with this, and I'm really looking forward to sharing my tips and tricks about how to set up a camera and keep your thumb on the pulse of the wildlife that are living and moving through your own backyard, your own corner of the Sky Island region. So please register for that, and we'll see you in September. It's a pleasure today to introduce you to the Patagonia Area Resource Alliance, known as PARA. And today we have Anna, Sophia, and Glenn Goodwin. Those two are representing all the great conservation work that they're doing in the Patagonia Mountains. Anna is the communications coordinator for the organization, and she's a transplant from the Midwest. She moved to Arizona in 2018, and she's been writing for a decade about the environment. And her goal with PARA is to help share information with the public so that they can advocate and get involved in protecting the amazing diversity of this region. Glenn has lived in southeast Arizona for his whole life. He is an absolute expert on the Patagonia Mountains. He was a rancher for almost 30 years and then took a job as a fire lookout on Red Mountain in Patagonia. He helped co-found PARA in 2011. And in 2012, he started their camera wildlife monitoring project, which we're going to hear about during their presentation. So thank you for both joining us, and we're really looking forward to hearing about all of your interesting and important work in the heart of the Sky Island region. Anna?
Share with you the conservation work that we have been doing both in conjunction with Sky Island Alliance and also for the last nearly decade in the Patagonia Mountains. There's a lot of really great work going on down here, and also a lot of things that we're really concerned about. So we're excited to share both of those things with you today and then have a discussion about it afterwards. So you've already met today's speakers. Emily will be speaking a little bit to some items later. But first off, our agenda for today, we'll start by introducing the Patagonia Mountains. If you've never been to this area, it is a gorgeous region full of wildlife and wonder, and we highly recommend you come and visit. Then we'll talk a little bit about the border wildlife study that we're doing in conjunction with Sky Island Alliance and Naturalia in Mexico, and kind of give you an overview of the species that we've seen in the Patagonia Mountains. We'll also talk about some historical at-risk species that rely on the Patagonia Mountains for survival. And then we'll talk about the threats to biodiversity, including mining and border wall construction, and we'll finish with a Q&A session. So to get started, Glenn will speak to you a little bit about the Patagonia Mountains. Since he's lived in this area practically his entire life, he knows it probably best. So yeah, he'll introduce that for you.
The Patagonia Mountains are really, as far as Sky Island mountain ranges go, they're small. You might even say they're tiny. What's really important about the Patagonias is on the US side, it's approximately from Red Mountain, where I was a fire lookout, and that's at the north end of the range. From the fire lookout to the border, it was about 8 miles as a crow flies. But the range continues on into Mexico, and in Mexico they're called the Sierra San Antonios, and it goes for another 10 miles into Mexico. And from there, it hits the Santa Cruz River. The Santa Cruz River actually makes a bow as it comes north through the San Rafael Valley, along the Patagonias, goes around the south end of the Patagonias, and then back north up toward Tucson. And then there are link ranges going into the Sierra Madre Occidental. And so that's why it's really an important mountain range, because it does continue into Mexico. And
It's also a drier range.
It is. We don't have, there's not a lot of year-round creeks. There are a couple that do flow. Alum Creek is one that flows year-round, but unfortunately, due to past mining and just the geology, the heavily mineralized rock, it's pretty acidic. So there's not a lot grows in it. Wildlife still, uses it for drinking and whatnot, but as far as free-flowing rivers, we don't have that. The big pine groves that you have in a lot of the Sky Islands, we don't have a lot of, because a lot of that was logged out way early on with some of the earlier mining that they did. And this is after the turn of the last century, when most of that was logged out. There are small pockets of conifer forest, but like I say, they're just in these little tiny pockets that people couldn't get into and do some serious logging.
Right. And just a fun fact, the Patagonias at their highest peak have an elevation of over 7,000 feet. So it can get quite cool depending on how high up you go. Mm-hmm. So the Patagonia Mountains are part of the Sky Island region, as you can see on this lovely map by Sky Island Alliance, which is a global hotspot for a lot of amazing biodiversity. Because we have all of these biotic influences. We have the Rocky Mountains converging with the Sonoran Desert, converging with the Sierra Madre, and more. We have so many different habitats. We have so many different elevations, different water sources. And so we have a just amazing breadth and diversity of species, flora and fauna both, that really come together in this very small area, which is just fantastic. So scientists have said that this region is one of the most biodiverse areas in the world and one of the top places globally in need of protection for species survival. And because of all of the wonderful things here, we have a lot of ecotourism down in the Patagonia Mountains, with Patagonia, the town of Patagonia being a gateway community for the Arizona hiking trail that goes from the US-Mexico border all the way up to Utah. We also have a lot of birding. We have hiking, camping, hunting, biking, and more. So it's just a fantastic area for a lot of ecotourism to come in and support that nature and wildlife. So now that we've given you a little brief introduction of the Patagonia Mountains, we kind of wanted to branch into the camera study that we are doing in partnership with Sky Island Alliance. Sky Island Alliance has started this program and asked us to join in and kind of collaborate on the data that we have seen. So just a basic overview between Sky Island Alliance and us, there are 22 cameras currently placed in the Patagonia Mountains. 16 of those are Sky Island Alliance's and 6 of those are ours. And so far in the last, we started in November tracking, and then Sky Island Alliance started in April. And between November and now, we have seen 48 species on these cameras, which is quite exciting. So I am going to let Emily give an overview of their border wildlife study and how they place their cameras, and then we'll jump in and kind of explain how we placed ours.
Sure. Well, this project is designed following the Team Vertebrate Monitoring Protocol, which means our cameras are deployed upon a regular grid system. And if you imagine a grid placed along the US-Mexico border, where each square or cell of the grid is 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer, we have our cameras placed in every other cell. This allows us to capture the habitat heterogeneity. And what we're trying to do is understand what the full complement of the wildlife community is that's living at and crossing back and forth across the border. So these cameras are on both the western slopes of the Patagonia Mountains along the border and the eastern slopes. And then we have additional cameras that span the San Rafael Valley and the Huachuca Mountain foothills.
Awesome. Thanks, Emily. And Glenn, would you like to say something about ours?
Yeah. PARA has had cameras in the Patagonia since 2012. I initially started with another conservation group that is no longer around in like 2007. So by being around a lot of cameras in the Patagonia Mountains. When we first formed PARA, there were other organizations that had cameras in the Santa Ritas and in the most of the Sky Islands that had cameras out there. There hadn't been a whole lot done in the Patagonias. So along with Defenders of Wildlife and Sky Islands Alliance at the time, I think they had 4 cameras that I was taking care of. And with Defenders, we had, I think at the high point was somewhere close to 20 cameras. Over the years, a lot of them get stolen, destroyed, floods has taken a few of them, things like that. So we're down to the 6 remaining cameras. With the camera placement, we're different than Sky Island Alliance because this isn't quite the scientific approach. What we were trying to do at that time, and what we're going to continue to try to do, is just see what's in there. So what we've done is try to place cameras near springs, different kinds of water sources, game trails, passes, and things like that. And these cameras have been there so long that, I mean, it's a good benchmark to see what the trends are. And an example of that is we had a fairly healthy population of mountain lions. Then a lot of the lions that I was getting photographs of over and over and over again started disappearing. And as it turned out, there is a mountain lion hunter that actually lives out of Patagonia, in the Patagonias. And what he does is he'll get clients that'll come down and want to get a mountain lion. So then he takes them out on mules with hounds, and they chase them down and they kill them. And that's the only thing I can attribute to, you know, I don't know for a fact, but that's the big change. It was one person coming in.
Awesome. Yeah. All right. So between Sky Island Alliance's efforts and ours, we have detected 48 species in the Patagonias. These are just a few pictures of some of the wonderful diverse species we've seen. This bear photo up in the left-hand corner is probably one of our favorites. So just an overview of some of the mammals that we have seen throughout this study. You can kind of read through them. I won't read them all, but we have a full array of skunks here, striped, spotted, hognose, and hooded, which is very exciting. We have found some Arizona gray squirrels, which are some at-risk squirrels. And in looking at this list, we found some really interesting takeaways. One of them being the badger that we have seen in this badger photo on the right here. We have not seen one up until this year. And so that's the first photo of a badger that we have actually gotten in a very long time, which could be a fluke, but could also be an exciting change of events. For the black bears, if you wanted to talk a little bit about the hair traps.
Yeah, with the black bears, what's really interesting, the Arizona Game and Fish did a lot of studies in the Sky Islands, but the one I know about in particular is in the Patagonia Mountains. And so what they would do is they would put up, it's a hair trap. And what a hair trap is you would have an attractant that would draw the bears in, and they would have the strand of like barbed wire, just one where the bear would have to crawl through and leave a hair sample. And so through those samples, with DNA checking, the bears that we have in the Patagonia Mountains are more closely related to the bears in the Sierra Occidental in Mexico than they are into the Rocky Mountains in the United States. So, you know, this is, to me, I think it's really kind of exciting to hear that.
Yep. We also have seen coyotes coming up to higher elevations, and in a way that we haven't seen before. We're starting to get more and more footage of coyotes, and we put our cameras up past 5,000 feet. So our cameras are all at a higher elevation. And then some things we're not seeing anymore. We are not seeing raccoons at higher elevations. I know Sky Island Alliance has captured raccoons in their study, but in the Patagonias themselves, especially we have seen them in the Patagonias, but at higher elevations, our cameras in particular have not captured them recently. And then historically, we used to have porcupines and possums in the Patagonia Mountains, but these are species that we haven't seen for years and are still not seeing in the Patagonia Mountains right now.
Rarely we will get possum photographs, and it's rare, and getting rarer. The porcupines, I have never had a porcupine on camera yet. I used to see those around the Patagonia Mountains, like in the San Rafael Valley. They were really common up until the 90s. And I have never been able to talk to anybody who knows what's going on.
So moving on, we have also detected a lot of birds. Most of these that you see in this list here were captured by Skyland Alliance. PARA's cameras, we have seen all of these birds, but because our cameras are lower to the ground and in very specific places, we tend to see them less frequently. So it's still exciting to get this data and see that we still have these birds around. And for the birds that we are seeing up at higher elevation, they're mostly canyon wrens and Mexican jays. So a few more photos before we move on. The 48th species that we found was a moth, which is part of an insect. I didn't want to just put one under a list, but kind of cool to see that we're capturing insects on camera too. And I just wanted to point out this upper left photo here of a spotted skunk and a gray fox in the same frame is maybe one of our other favorite photos from what we've gotten so far. And it just shows you the unique harmony and diversity of the species that we find in the Patagonias. So now let's go into a history of the species at risk. We have a lot of amazing species in the Patagonia Mountains, as you've already seen and we've already discussed. But a lot of these species are threatened, endangered, or sensitive. A list, I believe, that Arizona Fish and Game put out says that we have over 112 sensitive, threatened, endangered species in the Patagonia Mountains, which just speaks to how we need to continue to monitor and collect data on these. But there are 4 in particular species that Glenn would like to talk about.
Yeah, in the upper left-hand corner, that's the yellow-billed cuckoo. And they're, most of the habitat that they traditionally would be seen in is going to be more riparian areas and things like that. What they're finding out is a lot of these riparian areas, because of habitat destruction, building, pumping of water, things like that, they're diminishing in these areas, these habitats. So, a good example would be like what's going on in the San Pedro River. If they put in the subdivision out of Benson, it's this is going to affect the yellow-billed cuckoo and species like that. But what we're finding out is they are in a lot of the Sky Islands. And so this here's a photograph that I took in the Patagonia Mountains of the yellow-billed cuckoo. Right now, there's a lot being studied. They're studying them right now. What I'm saying, there's a lot of new discoveries about them. So. Then the lower left, we have the Mexican spotted owl. And I think there are 2 locations that I know of in the Patagonia Mountains where we have them. One location is really close to the Hermosa project, South 32's proposed mine that they want to put in. And I mean, it is really, really close to it. These are owls that I've, because I hike a lot in the Patagonias, that I've seen from time to time, probably going back to the early 2000s. So that's something that we're really trying to keep an eye on. I'm trying to think of the last time I saw fledglings, and I think I've got pictures from 2017. 2016, and nothing since then. And the only thing you can point to it is they've been doing a lot of work on the Hermosa project. So that's lots of lights, 24/7. They were doing a lot of construction. They're building a water treatment plant, a lot of roads going in, and then a lot of drilling. So once again, this is something else that we're really worried about. They also have to have riparian areas, areas that do have running water for them to have good habitat. The upper right photograph is a jaguar. We haven't gotten any photographs of jaguars as of yet. Historically, been going through Brown and Gonzalez's book, Borderland Jaguars. And so they did a good job of compiling all the killings of jaguars in northern Mexico and Arizona and Texas. And in the Patagonia Mountains, since 1924, I think there were 8 mountain lions killed. The last one was killed, I think it was in 1974. So it's not uncommon for them to be able to use these kind of ranges to go north, because once again, they do go all the way into Mexico. On the lower right, we have the ocelot. And I haven't gotten any photos, or we haven't gotten any photographs of ocelots, although a hunter did in 2012 in the Patagonia Mountains. And in looking at that ocelot was also photographed. It was a young male in the Huachuca Mountains, 25 miles away, the year before. So historically, we've had them come through. I can't really get into this because we don't have time. I grew up on a ranch in the Huachuca Mountains, and my father was a houndsman. He had hounds, and he hunted mountain lions. And he killed an ocelot in the Huachuca Mountains, I think like in 1963, on Pat Peak. Then he also was with a party that killed a jaguar near where the proposed Rosemont mine is in the Total Wreck Mountains. And that would have been, I think, a year or two later. So we know historically that, the Sky Islands and anything close to the border is really good habitat for jaguars, as well as the jaguars that have been seen in the Santa Rita Mountains and the Whetstone Mountains and the Huachuca Mountains. So we know they're there. It'd just be nice to know if we can continue to have them come back and forth.
Yeah, and so the big point with the at-risk species here are the 2 birds. Because their riparian habitats are being eroded, if the Patagonia Mountains continue to be eroded and disturbed, these birds may not have anywhere to go afterwards. And for the 2 cats, the Patagonia Mountains are one of the most important continuous corridors from Arizona into Mexico. And if we have disruptions and mining and the border wall construction, they may not be able to cross over anymore. So these are things that we really want to have addressed to make sure that these animals continue to be protected. So Glenn kind of already talked to a lot of the mining stuff, but here, now that we've talked about the biodiversity, we wanted to talk to you a bit about the threats and concerns that we're seeing in the Patagonia Mountains right now that are impacting these species. First up is mining. Patagonia has several different mining companies who have come in starting in 2006 with plans to either do exploratory drilling to then sell off the land to a bigger company to drill, or these companies are ready to get permits and start drilling. So we have South 32. This is a senior Australian mining company. They are currently in the process of, they just fixed up a bunch of old tailings at the Hermosa project and put in an active water treatment plant. And they are currently preparing a pre-feasibility study, which will announce some of their plan of operations when we expect that will come out sometime this year. They said September originally, but they have pushed it out to sometime in Q4. So we're kind of waiting to see what happens there. South 32 is probably the closest mining company to actually having an active mine site, which is why we are watching them very carefully. And they will be operating completely underground. Originally, before South 32 came in, there was a company who wanted to do an open pit mine, but Paro was able to stop that. So now it will be completely underground. And for purposes of this map that you're looking at, South 32 is operating on the yellow squares here. That is patented claims, which means that they own that land. It is private lands, not public land, not Forest Service land. And I believe they have 450 acres on which to operate. Then we have Barksdale Resource, which is a junior mining company. Junior companies they look for minerals and they get the land prepared and they try to sell to a senior mining company. They have those kind of dark purple gray squares that you see on this map here. And their claims are currently unpatented claims, and those are on public Forest Service land right now. And then we have Hud Bay, which is the Rosemont project, and we have Rio Tinto. And they are currently filing claims right now, but they haven't yet announced any of intentions to start mining. So overall, as you can see, we have 40,000 acres of mining claims put down in the Patagonia Mountains. That's a key chunk of the Patagonia Mountains, and it really bisects the mountains, which is a huge threat to the habitats of these species we've talked about, and a huge threat to the water, which we'll discuss in a minute. Anything you wanted to add there?
No, you got it.
Okay, perfect. So because South 32 is probably the closest mining company to actually have an active mine, here is an aerial shot of the of part of the 450 acres that they're on. You can kind of see how widespread the work is and how much scarring has taken place to the Patagonia Mountains already. You know, a decade ago, it didn't look like this at all. So it's quite a stark contrast. So moving on, we wanted to talk a little bit about the mining impacts on water and wildlife, just to kind of help the understanding of how this mining will impact everything in the Patagonia Mountains. Starting with water. First, I wanted to say that historically, I mean, we've had historical mine sites in the Patagonias for hundreds of years. Corporate historical mining started in the 1800s. Before that, it was all very small artisanal mines. We have about 130 abandoned mine sites in the Patagonia Mountains right now. So, you know, the Patagonia Mountains are not new to mining, right? But historically, every 100 years, they would take out 250,000 tons of ore. And a previous owner of the Hermosa project said that they wanted to take out that 100-year total, that 250,000 tons every 25 days. So the scale of mining that we will probably see in the Patagonia Mountains is beyond anything the mountains have experienced in their history. So mining impacts on the water, we're very concerned about water because water is the source of all life. Acid mine drainage, with the 130 abandoned mine sites that we have in the Patagonia Mountains, there's a lot of acid mine drainage. And acid mine drainage is the outflow of acidic water from a site. It comes from oxidation of iron sulfide, which is iron sulfide goes hand in hand with the ore that is removed. You can't have most minerals and metals without iron sulfide. So when they're processing that and they're removing the ore, then there's waste, there's the iron sulfide waste. And so as water runs through that waste, it dissolves and it enters the watershed and it enters the surface water. And so this leads to ecological destruction. This leads to contaminated water sources with metals, including arsenic, copper, and lead. And it is very, very difficult to remediate. You know, you can talk to, we've seen a lot of attempts to remediate a lot of this acid mine drainage, and it hasn't worked.
It hasn't. You know, one of the things that they try to do, there's a mine outside of Patagonia, very near where this photograph is in the upper left-hand corner, that had been leaking for years. It was called the World's Fair Mine. And finally, about a decade ago, they were able to finally get it plugged, and it was really expensive to do. They finally plugged the thing up. And I was talking to a guy from USGS, and the USGS guy said, well, what happens when you have a mine with extensive tunnel work that goes in and goes up, when you plug it up, that water is going to come out somewhere else. And it's still going to be acid mine drainage. It's just going to come out through fissures in rocks, or it's going to start poisoning springs. And as a good example, we were in the Patagonias last summer. I think it was in May. And we were above the World's Fair, right along the road. And it was an old air adit, or an old air shaft going into the World's Fair mine. And it probably, I would say, 60 feet higher than the entrance to the World's Fair that was plugged up. And this thing was leaking. And we did a pH on that, and it was what, 3?
Yeah, 3.5.
So these things keep popping up. So you plug a source here, it's going to come out somewhere else. So we don't know how to plug them up. It's just something that they don't know how to do.
Yeah,
They don't have the technology.
Yeah, and like this photo shows, this photo is from 2014. We have found several incidents of acid mine drainage in the mountains, which is just, it's very hard to deal with.
And incidentally, this photo on the left-hand corner, the upper left-hand corner, that mine was a tiny, tiny mine, and that was abandoned in the 1940s. So this thing has been leaking during big weather events ever since then.
Yeah, so outside of acid mine drainage and acidic water sources, which are obviously bad for wildlife who rely on those sources to survive, we also have plans for dewatering. In a July 21st update from South 32, they announced their plan to reconfigure the watershed with a 4-year plan for purposes of working its exploratory declines to a depth of 1,500 feet. And so the estimate came out to be a low of 2,000 to a high of 4,500 gallons per minute, which ends up being 1.6 billion gallons a year for the first 4 years. And then once they're in full operation, they're also going to continue to use water. So we don't even know what the impacts will be after those first 4 years, but 1.6 billion gallons every year for 4 years is a lot of water. This is going to impact surface water for animals. I mean, we have been, at least here in Patagonia, and we are currently in Bisbee right now, we have not been having a great monsoon season. It's been quite dry. And so, you know, with all of these animals in the Patagonia Mountains who rely on very little water already in a dry mountain range, to dewater the watershed we don't know where these animals are going to continue to get water from if the water and the surface water start to evaporate and dry up because of that usage. So that's something we're also very concerned about. Moving on from water, we also have other impacts on the wildlife. For example, mining. Currently in the state of Arizona, mining is exempt from dark sky laws because the mine needs to run 24/7 in order to make a profit. So if they needed to turn off during the evening hours, that would be a huge hit on their profit. And of course, the lights being on all the time are going to affect different animals, birds for one, bats, and also the noise pollution 24/7 from drill rigs and equipment and blasting. Last time we went to check one of our cameras in an area with Mexican spotted owls, we were camping and we could hear activity at night. And every time we go up to Red Mountain, we can also hear that activity from several miles away. So I imagine the impacts to the wildlife is going to be pretty severe. Just because the mine is running, we're going to have a lot of people coming in and out every day. That means a lot of road construction. That means a lot of vehicles, traffic. We've already noticed that there's a lot more road kills with all of that traffic going through the mountains. And that disrupts migration paths as well. That forces animals to find different ways around the mountains for their food and water sources. And then of course, just habitats in general and mating are disrupted by all of this activity. So these are all very concerning things for us from mining, and things that we're currently keeping an eye on and hoping to find ways to tackle. So then Emily will discuss border wall construction and the issues with that too.
Right, well, thanks. So when we think about the Patagonia Mountains, they're one of the largest 3 Sky Island mountain ranges that are bisected by the US-Mexico border. And that's really important because it's higher elevation habitat for these wide-ranging species that have already been described that are moving between mountain ranges in Sonora, Mexico, and Arizona. And so the US-Mexico border has a variety at the moment of different types of barriers. And the picture you can see here, this is a border wall that is not passable for large animals. And so if we could go to the next slide, I'll share some of the status of what's happening on the border. So this is not the Patagonia Mountains, this is to the east. This is the eastern slopes of the Huachuca Mountains. And this is where our border wildlife study starts, just over the peaks you can see in the photographs on the left-hand side. Now, this is a place very close to the Patagonia Mountains where border wall construction is actively happening right now. We have, what we're seeing is on the photographs on the left, you can see the steel wall that was built in the 90s. And this is at the southern border of National Park Service land on Coronado National Memorial. Now, this wall is only about 18 feet tall, and the new border wall that's going to be built is going to be 30 feet tall, so another 12 feet higher than this. And if you look at the photographs on the left-hand side, you can actually see the end of the wall. The original wall, when it was put in, stopped as it went up in elevation into the Huachuca Mountains. Unfortunately, starting in July, we have seen evidence of border wall construction. And so if you look at the lower left-hand photograph, they've begun to grade the road. Now, this is going up over steep and rugged mountain range. This is an area that for many years, the Department of Homeland Security said it was not necessary to put in a wall infrastructure. And so they're beginning to put in this wall. On the right-hand side, you can see an aerial photograph that was taken by our partners at Lighthawk that just shows that line of the border wall as it goes from where the San Pedro River crosses the border up into the Huachuca Mountains. Let me go to the next slide. So if you keep going west, so you fly over those foothills of the Huachuca Mountains, you cross the San Rafael Valley, you're in a stretch where border wall has not been built. And we've been studying this region because we want to understand what the wildlife community is in this place prior to any border wall construction. So the photographs on the left are some of my favorite places in the Patagonia Mountains, right at the US-Mexico border. And you can see in image 4 in the upper left-hand corner how the border is marked for much of the Patagonia Mountain region at the border. You see these Normandy-style vehicle barriers, the rusty steel vehicle barriers, and right behind it, a simple barbed wire fence. Now, this certainly can restrict some large animal movements, but most of the animals are able to move through this. So it is a barrier, but it is somewhat permeable to species that are moving between Sky Island ranges in search of water, food, mates, shelter. I love image 5 because this is where that border infrastructure of the vehicle barriers and the barbed wire actually stops. It's a place where you can get to the end of the border road and the fence line disappears, and it's just beautiful grassland and our Madrian evergreen oak woodlands. So there are, at the present time, stretches of the border that have no fence line, and it is the most passable area for wildlife to be moving back and forth between Mexico and the US. If you continue your journey to the west, heading towards Nogales, you get to the point where the border wall starts again. And this is, again, older stretches of border wall that from the western foothills of the Patagonia Mountains, it begins and carries on west all the way to Nogales. If we go to the next slide. This gives you a sense of the scale of the landscape that we're talking about. Again, this is an aerial image taken by plane from our partners Lighthawk. And you can see in the very bottom left-hand corner, you see a road, and then you see what is the border wall, that old stretch of border wall that's separating the US and Mexico and runs across the western crossing of the Santa Cruz River to Nogales. But to the left, to the east side of this photograph that's shown on the left, you see this open landscape. This is the habitat that both Glenn and Anna have described as being jaguar country. This is where ocelot and jaguar historically have been moving back and forth through the Sky Island region. It's critical open space where these wide-ranging animals need to cross the border. Now, we are not seeing any current evidence of border wall construction along the US-Mexico border here in the Patagonia Mountains, but the environmental laws have been waived, and many other laws have been waived. So it is possible for the Trump administration to begin border wall construction as they are in the Huachuca Mountains, and we're waiting to understand more about whether funding has been allocated for the construction, and we're watching this all very closely. Our westernmost border wildlife study camera is right near the end of the wall in this photograph. So we have eyes, and we're checking this area very frequently to see what's happening. Okay.
Thanks, Emily. All right. So after all has been said and done about the Patagonia Mountains, there are some ways to get involved in what's going on down here. First would be to volunteer with Skyland Alliance to help document springs. They are currently looking for volunteers on that, and to help ID the species that are being captured on camera. Both of these are social distancing friendly, and I highly recommend volunteering. I have done that in the past, and it's really fun. And also it gives you an opportunity to get out and get hiking and actually see this country on foot, which is just, you know, pictures can't describe these regions and these areas. So highly recommend checking it out if you have time. Also, call your representatives and oppose border mining wall construction. That's a good way to have your voice be heard. It's really, really important. Email if you don't feel like calling, but do tell them that you oppose this for all of, you know, the impacts and reasons listed. And then finally, vote this November to help ensure better environmental policies in the future, because like Emily mentioned, a lot of these policies are currently being eroded by our administration, and we can't protect these species if we don't have those policies in place. So yeah, that's it. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to share with you a little bit about what PARA has been doing and about our joint camera study and all the species we've seen. If you would like more details, here's the contact information both for Patagonia Area Resource Alliance and for Scotland Alliance. We'd be happy to hear from you. And then I believe we have questions maybe.
Yeah, exactly. So if you have any questions for any of us about what you've been hearing today, please feel free to enter it into the chat box. And while we're waiting to see what questions come in, I was just curious if you two could share, if someone wants to come and visit the Patagonia Mountains for the first time, where would you recommend they come to see the beautiful landscape and experience the mountains?
Actually, the best thing to do, unless you want to go right through what they want to have as a mine site, which is actually a beautiful drive, is to go through Harshaw, and that would be Forest Road 58. So if you come out of Patagonia, hit Forest Road 58, that'll take you all the way through the Patagonias. Then you'll hit Forest Road 61, which goes east-west across the along the border. And so you can either go through the San Rafael Valley on the way back, or you go through a pass that goes and takes you into Nogales. And that's really a pretty drive. So in any one of those areas, I mean, if you want to go to Nogales and hit 61 and go east-west over the Patagonias, it's a gorgeous drive, and you get to see a lot. The San Rafael Valley, which is all part of it, it's gorgeous. And I'm not saying that because I'm from there. If I didn't live here, I would move here.
Excellent. That's great.
And if people have more questions about very specific areas to go, if people want, you know, camping tips or hiking tips, feel free to email the info@patagoniaalliance.org, and we can hook you up with some places to go that we know are easy to get to by a normal car and kind of fun for one person or a family. So
great. So I'm curious how often you see wildlife when you're out checking these mine sites, when you're out checking the cameras. Have you had any interesting wildlife encounters?
Well, almost every time you're going to see something. It may not be really big. I've run into bear quite a few times, you know, just as you're hiking, running into them. Javelina a lot, coatimundis from time to time. One mountain lion that I actually just ran into, he was in a rock pile sleeping in some brush, and I just happened to spook him out. Deer, a lot of the time you're going to see a lot of deer. Lots of different reptiles and things like that.
canyon wrens,
all different kinds of birds.
flycatcher species.
Yeah.
I mean, if you spend long enough we'll occasionally just sit down and kind of listen and wait. And we'll see hummingbirds. We once saw an owl sitting up in a tree, and all of these birds came over to the tree and started like flying in and trying to spook the owl away. And I mean, that was a really incredible experience, just because we sat there for 5 minutes taking a break and happened to look up.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, we've got a couple questions coming in. One is about camera monitoring on the Mexican side of the Patagonias by Mexican organizations. Are you aware of any counterparts that are working on similar issues as you are?
I've heard that there were that were going to, and this has been a number of years ago. That project fell apart. So that was in around 2008 that they were going to do that. I know Skyland Alliance is actually the only one that I know of, your organization, and that's a little bit further south. It's not that far, and you're getting ocelots and all kinds of cool stuff. What, 30 miles from south of the border?
Right, right. So yeah, we have partners at El Arababi that have camera traps set up on their ranch, and that's exactly right. They've got breeding populations of ocelot, which are just south of the border. Closest to the border that I'm aware of is much further east. So in the Huachuca Mountains, the Rancho Los Fresnos property, that's where the Naturalia cameras are placed as part of our border wildlife study. And then Cuenca Los Ojos, further east, also have cameras going on, but they're not, as far as I know, not in the Patagonia Mountains specifically. There's been a question coming in to just explain how people stakeholders in the region can really come together and work together on these issues. I mean, it's not specific to mining or the border wall, but just how you can advise us to mobilize on these issues. You mentioned calling our representatives, but curious if you have any other thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I can say in Patagonia, there are quite a few different conservation organizations and nonprofits who are working on these issues, who need volunteers. There's Borderlands Restoration Network, they're working on habitat and, I'm forgetting the word, but basically habitat restoration. They're working on seed collection to bring back in some native plants that support pollinators. We also have hummingbird monitoring network, if you want to get involved in monitoring the hummingbirds in the area. Some of the other ones.
Well, we have the Tucson Audubon Society has the Patton Center. That's another hummingbird center and a birding center in Patagonia. As well as further down the creek is the Sonata Creek Preserve. That's owned by the Nature Conservancy. So, you know, these are all people I'm sure you could throw in with and volunteer, donate, whatever. Yeah.
And then also, yeah, calling your representatives. Voting is really important this year. And then just like seeing which organizations really fit what you want to do, and then ask how you can get involved. Currently, Patagonia Area Resource Alliance is kind of working with some teams on different issues. So if you feel like you have any specific skills that you really want to help with, you know, if you have grant writing experience, or if you want to, you know, get out and help check some cameras, or we don't have any events right now because of COVID, but, you know, anything like that, feel free to reach out to our email and just say, hey, I'd like to get involved somehow, and we can work with you. Yeah, Robert says Friends of Sonata Creek as well. So, I mean, it's just a wealth of great organizations that would all be willing to talk to you.
Great. So there was another question about insects in the Patagonia Mountains. And are you aware of groups or projects that are actually serving the invertebrate life in this area?
I know it has been done. There's been several people doing it way in the past, but I nothing current right now. No, I don't.
Okay. Yeah, I know that that's been a component of the border BioBlitz that has been happening along the entire US-Mexico border for several years. Unfortunately, this year the events were canceled due to the pandemic. So often that's people go out in the spring, March and April, and try to survey as much of the different taxonomic groups that they can find in the area. So we're looking forward to having that event happen. Hopefully it can happen in spring 2021. Okay, well, with that, I don't see, hopefully I haven't missed any other questions. We really appreciate you joining us today, and thank you to Anna and Glenn and Para for everything you're doing on behalf of the Patagonia Mountains. It's a pleasure to be collaborating with you. And thank you for tuning into this coffee break. I hope everyone stays safe and healthy and cool during this very hot month of August here in the Sky Island region. Best wishes to all of you, and this recording will be available on our website sometime early tomorrow.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.